church. The consequence then is that in the interest of there being an orderly church, Paul has given us some instructions about how boys and girls get along with each other. They are there to show for the world, again, the relationship between Christ and his church.
Right.
They're not there to beat women up politically, to make them economic slaves. That's not the point at all. The fact that it is so often perverted is awful. And it is the responsibility, I think the responsibility of the fathers in the Church of Christ in the latter day to bring some order back into that thing. How dare a man say to his wife, well, I'm your head and you have to do it my way because I'm your head. That's nonsensical. Mm-hmm. He needs to take counsel with her and understand her point of view. Yes, he's the court of final appeal in some sense, but we've even discovered that that isn't always the right way to go. And my wife, for example, has direct access to my spiritual father. If I need a whooping, he'll give me one over the matter of how I handle the responsibility of representing Christ in that marriage. It's not me and her in that sense. It's me representing Christ and her representing the bride of Christ in the marriage. For women who do not have husbands, there is still provision made. And the provision is in the form of fathers. The Old Testament gives us both of those pictures. A woman's custody was in the hands of her father until the time of her marriage. At the time of her marriage, custody of that woman was given to a man who became her husband. If later in life she was a widow, then there were male relatives whose responsibility it was to care for her because we still were representing Christ and his church. Right. Even 2,000 years in advance of his appearance in the earth. That representation, God was consistent. He was always consistent.
Okay. Thank you, Corbett. That was a great explanation as far as God's intent. I think when we begin to see it from the perspective of how the relationship is supposed to mirror Christ and the church, we won't look into the sexuality of it more. There wouldn't be that competition,
right,
between the male and the female as much. Joe, you had something you wanted to say?
Well, just as I was listening to Corbett, which I obviously agree, but I mean, you use the word custody, okay, which in the context for which you obviously correct, okay, but I was just thinking to myself, somebody sitting out there listening to custody, nobody has custody, it's like it's so poisoned and charged. And what I was thinking of is that, or about, is that women have greatly suffered as a result, for example, of the modern day women's movement. In other words, because they're told, they're slowly fed a lie, that I can do it all. I can have the career, I can be a mom, I can, and I'm like, no, you can't, and neither could I. In terms of the certain realm, it's like whatever you're equipped to handle. But I mean, but they've been slowly fed this thing that just kind of continues to grow and grow and grow, and it's killing them. It's changing their whole psyche. They begin, like I say, at the extreme, they begin to really hate men, just men, period. Or the whole gender. They begin to think of it as a supreme enemy that's oppressed us all. I mean, it just poisons them just a little bit at a time.
Well, that's a good point.
Well, and the behavior of men has so reinforced that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So very much reinforced it, because we're not, we weren't really raised understanding things we're talking about together this evening. We've learned these things the hard way, really.
Right.
Most of it we've learned the hard way. My wife is a very enduring person. She's tolerated over 4 decades of my learning how to be her husband. That's rather a remarkable testimony. Now, she knew how to be my wife from the outset. She didn't have any trouble. She knew how to be my wife. That never was for her a problem whatsoever. It was me learning to be a husband that was forever. Now I'm using our example to say that men have had a lot to do with driving women away and into these political ideas that Joe was talking about, and it's very difficult to extract. And some of it really is really weird stuff. Men are almost completely irrelevant in some branches of this thinking. We were meant to operate together.
Yes.
A man and a woman operating together as one flesh, showing forth the glory of God in the marriage relationship, portraying the bride, the Christ and his bride through all the generations of man until the consummation of that wedding, which basically is presented to us in the 21st of 22 chapters of the book of Revelation. And even there is preservation of difference. The city comes down, and it says of the city that it has no temple because God and his Christ are its temple.
Right.
But the temple is one thing, and the city is another thing. And, it just impresses me more and more all the time that we're talking about the wrong thing when we're struggling over who gets what goodies out of a marriage.
Wow.
That's not even the right question.
Right.
The marriage has a purpose in God. And if it's not actually doing a reasonable job of representing that purpose, then the rest of the argument is stupid. I mean, we need to get serious about understanding what the marriage is.
Yes. Well, the Apostle Paul exhorts that we actually, there's two things as far as in the relationship of the marriage, which basically displays the husband and wife. He says, first of all, that wives, submit to your husband as unto the Lord.
As unto the Lord.
And then he tells the man, the husbands, lay down your wife basically for your wife, sacrificially. Yeah. Just lay down your life for your wife so that she can have that expression of love that's needed there. But even in today's society, the word submit have been taken out of even vows.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we sort of have the mentality that most men say, either you submit or split, that wrong frame of thinking, wrong attitude.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But when the scripture talks about submitting, in the case where Paul says that I wish a woman to submit, to her husband
mm-hmm.
and in everything,
mm-hmm.
as unto the Lord, what is your definition of submission?
Well, the will of Christ is completely submitted to the will of his Father.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't make independent decisions, and he does not make independent decisions, and he will not make independent decisions. When all the nations of the earth have become his kingdom, he will present that kingdom, that universal kingdom, intact to his Father. The relationship between the two of them is such that there is no other possible outcome. In the transition from the divine persons that they are to the not yet divine persons that we are, as long as we're in the flesh. We are divine persons, but we also carry around the flesh and the soulish, earthly nature of the flesh. That soulishness, interferes with our divinity to the extent that we don't necessarily look like them. That's granted. But I'm in the position where I must make decisions on a daily basis that have to do with submitting myself to him.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that I am submitted to him, it's relatively easy for my wife to be submitted to me because her welfare is found in the submission. If I am submitted to Christ but she can't submit to me, it's as though she had left the marriage.
Mm.
And when she leaves the marriage, according to Scripture, she then is in danger. So that turns into that issue of headship, for example, that Paul brings up. When a woman prays or prophesies with her head uncovered, it's dangerous. When a man prays or prophesies with his head covered, it's dangerous. They're exactly 180 degrees apart. And that has to do with maleness and femaleness. But at the same time, I am required to grow into the maturity that enables me to completely submit my will to his, as he submitted his to his Father's.
Okay.
She can't possibly go wrong if she submits to me when I am submitted to him. The difficulty is that she can't always know whether I am or not. So there's the dynamic of our marriage inherent in that. We have to negotiate something that Jesus and the Father didn't have to negotiate except once. The only time they negotiated was really one-sided. Jesus made his decision in Gethsemane. And he said, not my will, but yours be done. That's the only negotiation we know of between the Father and the Son. I negotiate with the Lord a lot. You want me to do what, Lord? You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
And frequently miss it. And sometimes even when I didn't miss it, I act as though I had. That will, of course, cause some uncertainty in my wife. Because she's not sure many times where I am in my own ability to submit to the Lord. And so we have to have a negotiation, an ongoing negotiation, wherein she reminds me that I need to do that, and I do it. And I let her know that I've done it. And then we work together. And the goal is to work together. And if you're working together, actually, something got submitted to something.
Right.
That's an inevitability.
That's right.
And the order is presented to us in the text because we're to show forth Christ and his bride.
That's beautiful. Joe, you have something you want to?
Well, just a practical example of what this might look like if it's working reasonably well. I know very well with some friends of mine, couple. The woman is brilliant, you know, going for PhD, you know, I mean, you know, always top of the class, you know, so I mean, very capable woman, okay? Her mother was extremely controlling, okay, and to the point, even though she's, you know, she's married and on her own, okay, her mother has sway over her. You know, she's concerned for her mother's approval, what her mother would think about the way she did the flowers in the garden, you know, what mom would think about this, that, or the other thing. I mean, it was just, you know, so her and her husband had a talk, and he said, well, you just need to come under my protection in this. She's like, what do you mean? She said, well, we need to sit down with your mom, and I need to have a little discussion, and he outlined what he wanted to talk to her about. So she was like in fear as a result of that, okay? But she agreed, okay? So he, you know, the mom was over, and you know, and he began to talk to her about the nature of their relationship, how it worked, and then why, when you know she had things that she wanted to criticize her daughter about, she needs to speak to him, you know, because he, you know, and he starts outlining this. Well, you know, it didn't go well at first, okay? You know, the mother-in-law, you know, like 5 or 6 times stormed out of the room, said she was never coming back, broke out crying, you know, whatever. But eventually, Tony just, the guy just persevered, okay, and then something happened in her. And then all of a sudden she's like, yeah, I wish I had that. That's really wonderful. Wow. You know, and it has 180 the relation. I mean, it is totally, in one session, by the grace of God, has totally transformed that relationship. In other words, she's out from under, okay, you know, her mother's domination, okay. Tony, who is not the favored son-in-law at all, now can do no wrong. You know, I mean, it was just, you know, things were brought into the correct order. You know, it's just, you know, it works well. You know, I mean, she's really glad about it, you know, but she had to trust her husband, you know, and trust that he had grace for the situation, and she did. And it, you know, like she told me while I was just starting out, she was like, this is the worst decision I ever made in my life. Why did I let him do this? You know, but then it all came out well. So, I mean, that's a practical application. Another simple one is, wife one time comes home and tells her husband, so-and-so, my best friend, said this to me, and I was really offended, and it's really hurt our relationship, you know, and she's been brooding about it all day. So the husband prays, and he comes back to her, and he says, you know what, I think you totally misunderstood what she said. I think she really, you know, this is the way you should have taken that. All right, so now she has 2 choices. She can take her husband's assessment, or she can take her assessment, right, which is going to leave her in turmoil and strife. Okay? She chooses to take her husband, to come under her husband's assessment, accept that as correct, which afterwards turns out to be the correct perception. So, you know, like, the problem disappears. Right. You know? The problem disappears instantaneously. Because she, even though she held, no, I think this is it, she decided to take her, you know, we decide to take the Lord's point of view on something. Right. You know?
That's good. That's good.
I can give you a couple of similar kinds of examples, Joe. One in our own life, relatively early in our marriage, well, look, around 10 years in,